If you like what we do here, be sure to like and subscribe. Even support us on Patreon. Now let's go. Pauper Commander players, how the hell are ya? I feel like I've already said this before. Maybe I have. So what you're noticing, is things look a little different today. We got 3 people on the screen. These are my dear friends who host the CPDH.Vibes podcast, and today we're kind of doing a further exploration on the topic of mid-range. As you have, if you're watching this video, you've likely watched the previous video where Ben and I are providing commentary on a shared game that we had in Sanctuary 9. It was a pretty unique experience that we had 2 non-Neanderthal people who could articulate their thoughts on what they were doing in retrospect as they were watching the gameplay footage. I think it went over pretty well. Not that it's going to be a mainstay of what we do here, only when necessary, which for the topic of mid-range, it kind of, I think it set the tone for kind of getting in the heads of people playing. Now, we can get into it later about, I'm classifying Akiri as mid-range. Ben would classify it maybe slightly differently, but that's what these conversations are for, is kind of recognizing the nuances in those things, where they're appropriate, where they're inadequate, yada, yada, yada. So before we get into the meat of the stuff, I've been brewing mid-range stuff that I'm not going to talk about because I'm going to be doing more content later after this series wraps, and you'll get it then. Haha. But you guys have been brewing and doing. So what you been up to?
Okay. The last couple of weeks been playing a lot of CPDH, having a good time. Playing against a variety of decks, not just the meta stuff, but also some more experimental stuff. In terms of my own brewing efforts, the last thing I put together was Lazarus Chancellor, which is like attempting to do kind of some of what Shadow Spinner does in terms of being a kind of Demir hybrid combat deck, with the trade-off being you lose access to Voltron damage, but you gain the capacity, a bit more capacity for the deck to kind of function in lieu of the commander, I guess, but it's kind of potato. Outside of that, some mono green slop, some more efforts of kind of hybrid Izzet decks like Sprite Dragon, etc. Put some more time in. So I spent a lot of time with Charade of Numbing Depths, which is an Azorius kind of tap-down control combo list. I don't really know how to feel about that list. It has some very, very, very strong matchups and some very unplayable matchups. Which I think it's okay if decks have a metagame niche more broadly, and I think I'm probably nearing the end of my experimentation with that list. But generally, just enjoying the space, seeing what other people are getting up to. Still, I think the pace of content keeps coming out. We're now getting Edge of Eternity spoilers. We just finished processing everything that came out of Final Fantasy, and many of those commanders, I think for the most part, a lot of them pretty mediocre, but certainly a few of them like Black Waltz. We don't even really understand what the impact of that deck is on the meta. We've played against it a few times. We can theorycraft about it. We can see instinctively how good it is. We really don't know until this stuff gets to stick around for a while. So, blistering pace of content that we're having to absorb and receive, and it means that a lot of these conversations can become dated very quickly. But looking forward to getting into hearing Clay's perspective as one of our longest-standing players on mid-range in the format, and sharing our insights about what we've learned. So, Adam, how about you?
Yeah, I've been good. I'm excited to be here, Clay. Thank you for having us here. And overall, I mean, what have I been brewing and doing lately? I've been working a lot. I work probably, I know, right, about 6 days a week.
What a loser!
And I haven't even had time to clean. I mean, we've got, I got stuff. My place is under construction, but so as far as what I've been brewing lately, I mean, I've been trying. That's what I love doing, because I like to bring something new to the table and have players react to something that it is unknown. But I've been playing around with Deathless Knight for a little while. Nobody's seen the list yet. It's a Golgari, very mid-rangey deck. We'll talk a little bit about the archetype today. But I've also been working on Jotun Grunt, which is mono white, little spiciness there. We'll see if it can do anything. And of course, my main is always Mystic Enforcer that I'm working on until I find something that is more fun than that. That's where I love to go to.
Sweet. So because we had to re-record, I missed my opening joke of like we may not be the number one CPDH podcast, but we're the best looking. So
I'll take it. Thank you so much.
It's still funny. So we're going to kick things off by kind of doing a recap of a light recap. So this will automatically kind of sit Adam side seat at the moment. So Ben and I can kind of do a cleanup step on what we perceive after the fact of our commentary video. If you haven't watched that, I'm going to put a link to that below in the description. The basic premise is we're sitting down in a game. He recorded his commentary as he's watching the game. I recorded commentary as I was watching the game. It wasn't necessarily, I mean, there's play-by-play elements in there, but it wasn't necessarily meant to be that. It was meant to be more of a, okay, we're at this juncture, we perceive independently. I perceive this is what's happening. Ben and I never talked during the game, which I found supremely interesting in that some points we shared in our train of thought, and other points we were like, okay, is he thinking this? Am I thinking that? And we were kind of close, but not like right on. So that, I think it was an interesting breakdown of like, not in the moment because we weren't doing it at the time we were playing, but you know, it was close enough to somewhat be in the moment, is, you know, as much in the moment as you can be. So
Sure.
What are your perspectives been on that, the outcome of that project? Are you do you have any druthers of like I wish I would have been more communicative of like this point, that point, you know, or, you know, how are you feeling about it in general?
I thought it was cool. I thought I think gameplay breakdowns are a great way of giving someone something to knock into while they're actually just absorbing things while passively taking in some of what you're saying. I think it's definitely possible for us to kind of sit here and drown people in noise, but we just talk about things at the top of our head. And it's like some people just want to see some actual gameplay being played, or they want to see some actual tangible examples. I also think a lot of the time some smaller things that maybe go through your head when you're playing that don't occur to you outside of that space come up, which is really nice. I think the thing that surprised me watching it back was how comfortable you felt in your position against me throughout the game. I don't want to, you won the game, so I don't want to say it was in any way ill-deserved or inappropriate, but it was certainly, it made me rethink how the threat level that I presented. I think at least on one occasion you said that it looked like I'd either missed a turn or I'd failed to develop, and actually I think it was probably representative of what that normally does, to kind of play some weenies and strap them up and start swinging and drawing cards, etc. So I think the deck you're playing is definitely more on the aggressive side of mid-range, whereas mine is a lot more paced and looks to have another option.
It's me.
Wrap up them weenies, man.
We love being aggressive, man. So it was, I think that game in particular was really important for me because it shows again how you can be focused on sort of 80% of what's pertinent at the table and still miss the whip of the trees and still fail to assess something too early. But what was your feeling? I mean, were you sitting there wondering what I was doing? Like, were you worried about the board wipe? Were you worried about the combo? What were you thinking? You were just hedging your bets and seeing what happened? Or?
So Corpse Knight, that list is built and play tested against regular EDH decks. So I get board wiped a lot. So by virtue of being used to that, I've kind of built in not a foil, but a way to compensate, for that, once you do get board wiped, because it's going to happen. So I felt like my ability to come back after a board wipe is pretty good because the way that it's built.
They've already laid down. If you left someone at 8 life or whatever, there's only so much picking up the pieces you have to do. So yeah, it makes sense.
So I don't have the exact math, but while we were playing, you made the comment that I never seemed really worried about your game plan. I wasn't, but that was only that was just the quick calculus of like Hares is a very much go wide strategy. So just the quick calculus of your ability to go tall versus my ability to go wide just a quick assessment of like, okay, I am progressing through my go wide plan faster than he's going through his go tall plan. So the the calculus was like really focused on when I was going to make the turn and start applying pressure to you, because I had to do that before you did that to me, because then that would negate. And then in the video, you hear me talking about being overly concerned about the lifelink guy. Yeah, because that's the nullifier of that calculus that I was talking about. So I had confidence that as I say in the video, make the plan, work the plan. I had confidence that I built a good game plan and wasn't really worried about impediments to that, because I'd planned for those, made contingencies for those.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, that makes sense. It was a lot of fun. So what's next? What are we talking about?
So what is next? Let me bring up my handy dandy. Okay, so what we can do now, kind of a premise for this entire episode here. If we look at the commentary video as a present day, kind of like in the moment, contemporary analysis of Midrange as it's happening this video is meant to really focus on the historical perspective and performance of Midrange and all the tidbits kind of leading up to now, and then a future one we'll talk about theory crafting moving forward, and even beyond that, some actual deck building and deck specific and card specific choices relative to that theory crafting that comes in the future. So I think it'd be really critical at this moment in time to kind of go around the room and talk about whether or not it's in expectations or perspectives or perceptions, or however you want to label that, of Midrange at present and historically. And that'll give us kind of like a baseline, the viewers anyway, a baseline, because we're not all going to agree and align, directly, which is great. I think it's great. So, Adam, please.
So, yeah, thank you. So how would I define and kind of explain Midrange to somebody? I'm going to start off by saying I'm sure that I'm going to be a little bit alone in this definition, but my take on archetypes is that they show trends, but I don't want them to be thought of as concrete entities. Right? So that's the number one thing that I'm going to ask, is that use archetypes to talk about trends, but don't use them to label. And that's something that I'll ask people, because you can have a deck that is very aggressive with creatures and damage, and we call that aggro by design, but there may be games where it has to play a bit more defensively because of the pot it's in. So then an aggro deck might be playing more of a control-y type of a thing. You might have a deck that wins with a combo, but might not perform as a combo, like a turbo trying to get to a combo as quickly. And my definition of midrange is that it is the flexible archetype, meaning that it has the ability, we used to call it aggro control way back in the day, where it could shift to aggressive into the opponent, or it could shift back to be on the defense to negate everything the opponent's doing at a moment's notice. It's kind of like the Minutemen, if you will, of the archetypes. And so that's where I define midrange, is that it has flexibility. The problem with midrange, I think, is that it's so flexible that it has a really hard time finding a definitive way to win, so it has to borrow from other sources. So Voltron is a win condition within our format. Combo is a win condition within our format. You can have a mid-range build of a deck, and it can actually win using one of those types of win conditions. So that's my loose, long definition.
You are definitely the abstract one amongst us.
I knew it would be. I knew it. So.
All right. It's going to be a tough one for you, Ben. How are you going to follow that up?
Sorry, Ben.
Look, I'm not going to offer anything too exotic. I mean, I think that in terms of how we talk about mid-range, there is some kind of rough idea we have in mind, but from a theory point of view and for a definition that we can work on, I would just define it as everything that isn't everything else. And that is an enormously broad bucket. I don't really think that's a problem. First of all, because it's how we formatted a lot of the data on .guide anyway. But secondly, because in spite of the theoretical space that can occupy, I think a lot of these decks end up looking kind of similar anyway. So if we consider that aggro, that we've kind of, it's decks that attempt to win a couple of turns faster than the average turn. They look to kill one or more players by turn 4 or 5, and they have the vulnerability of if they're stopped, it's very difficult for them to get back to the game. If combo decks are built in such a way that assembling some kind of infinite loop and using that to end the game is their predominant, if not their only mechanism for winning the game, and the entire shell is set up to facilitate that. If control is a shell which spends almost all of its time disrupting what everyone else is doing, and then playing either an early or a late threat to capitalize on what they've done, mid-range being the fourth quadrant, and again, there are stuff inside that like Voltron and Tempo, etc. But mid-range as a fourth quadrant is just kind of decks that somewhere sit in the middle. If control expects to win, not always by any means, but typically slightly later than average, combo doesn't really have a specified clock, but it's probably around the slightly average turn, and aggro tends to win slightly faster than average. I think mid-range decks generally are decks that have that aren't fast enough to be aggro, aren't controlling enough to be control, and aren't interested enough in comboing to be comboing. And it sounds quite a negative thing. Implicit in that is maybe some kind of pejorative that, oh, this deck doesn't really know what it's doing. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's more of a question that inside the shell itself, you have multiple categories of cards, and they're there to fulfill different purposes. They have more than one responsibility. It's not just trying to find a combo. It's not just trying to lay damage. It's trying to refit its hand or otherwise acquire resources. It's trying to get off the ground consistently. It's trying to have answers to the aggro deck, answers to the combo deck, etc. Typically, damage or commando damage is a vehicle by which you end the game. But I mean, there are decks that look to mill people out or have some alternative win condition. Again, creatures, you do get decks that focus on direct damage or direct life loss, as we're going to explore in the episode. But for the most part, some kind of creature package is typically the threat used to end the game. But again, I think all those are just specifics. In my view, it really is as simple as it's not one of the 3 other quadrants. And if you can't put a deck into one of those 3 other quadrants, it's now a mid-range deck, in my view.
So I'll kick off addressing the pejorative of the mid-range label. So I think we could agree that in casual Pauper Commander Magic, they don't really like playing a whole lot of control. They don't really like playing a whole lot of hyper fast aggro. So what you're
combo for that matter,
or combo, right? So what your general, like, not to say that they won't play control elements, they won't play combo elements, and they won't play aggro. It's just not, those categories of things aren't going to be the hyper tuned things that you would see in competitive Pauper Commander. So what you're left with on the casual front is that the vast majority, anecdotally, of the decks that you're going to experience are these mid-range value piles. So this is the origin of the pejorative of mid-range in competitive Magic, because some competitive players who are fucking assholes sit there and point to this fact, about casual Magic, and they assume that if somebody brings, that stuff to a competitive table, then they're just emulating what they'd experience in a casual game. And that's not the case. Now, to those assholes' credit, there are some play patterns, card choices, play styles, like, there are things that are exhibited in competitive games by mid-range players that are similar enough to what you would find in a casual game. But that isn't enough of a breakpoint for me to say, okay, they're playing mid-range, they must be casual, that sort of thing.
Right.
And then
again, it is worth noting that, like, if somebody starts by playing casual games and decides to dip their toes into competitive, but they jump into a tournament early, or they have some practice games beforehand, it's often the case that the first deck they'll bring to a competitive event is their flagship deck they've worked on for a long time, which will almost invariably be a mid-range deck. You do get pilots who move into the space and start playing stuff that isn't mid-range, but in my experience, they don't tend to hang around the casual scene too long, specifically because of what you described. It tends. The thing about mid-range decks and mid-range pods in general is that there's some kind of assumption that people get the breathing room to do whatever it is they wanted to do in the first place. And in a casual space, that's fine because all you wanted to do was be like, I made all my tokens, I'm happy. I did 10 damage to your face directly, I'm happy, etc. And so there will be people who jump into those pods and think, I'm not really interested in being given all this space to do all of this. I want to be like the sweatiest decks. I want to see what the limit of this format actually looks like. And so, to come circle on that point, there will be the case that when we say mid-range is underperforming, they're probably, we could say for experience, and we could argue this hypothesis that there's going to be a greater than, for the other archetypes, there's a greater than average representation of people who are either new to competitive Magic or are new to PDH specifically. And so it pollutes the win rate, etc., because those people maybe don't have as much experience knowing what they're looking at, etc. So,
well, also another talking point too. So we're talking about polluting the win rate. So mid-range has gone through a few evolutions of its expression in the competitive scene. Very early on, it was emulating that mid-range value pile kind of vibe, where the pinnacle of performance for that mid-range list specifically was from the perspective of ensuring that you're hitting your mana drop or your drops on curve and getting out Q Adam, getting out your value engines to in order to affect your game plan later in the game, because there's always been a recognition that mid-range was attempting to oppose its will at a later period of time. It's just the card selection previously, like in the beginning of mid-range for competitive, was simply focused on early value engine, late game outcome. All we have to do is connect A plus B and we have a win. Turns out that's not the case. So what mid-range looks like in more recent history, which we can kind of get into a little bit more here shortly, is like the Wilsons or the Vizkopas or the Arabellas or TPIs or things of that nature, where that the value engine is still present, it's just not as prominent. So we've had moderate success there, historically speaking, but still that performance is one of the neat ways talking about .guide or thinking about .guide, talking about .guide. One of the neat things about the metagame analysis page with all the charts on it. For the organized stuff, it automatically defaults to the last year. So what I can, assuredly say without even looking at it is just knowing that that old style of mid-range deck was played more than a year ago. So the current data reflected there, you can change the time manually if you want. But in the last year, that mid-range data is not reflecting that old style version of the deck. Or deck building premise that I was speaking to. So everything on the website now reflected on that metagame analysis page is all the current, trains of thought. So, which is why we
and
can.
It's also noting, like, the problem with having conversations about mid-range in general, and again, probably because of how we define it in quite a lazy, it's everything else kind of way, and it probably deserves breaking up, is that it's quite difficult to identify consistent themes across all these decks that we lump into mid-range brackets. Some of them don't draw almost any more cards than you'd expect. They just play as kind of draw go strategy, and some of them, play for the late game. Some of them play for the earlier start game without moving to aggro territory. Quality of colors, the interaction, etc. Like, there's so many different variables that come up that make these kind of issuing these kind of theoretical edicts of this is how you should be doing this and this is how you do this. It's really tricky because it depends a lot on the commander. But I think what is interesting is if you look at that quadrant as everything else that isn't aggro or combo or control, mid-range is abnormally underperformant. So there must be something. Well, there's a lot of assumptions baked into that. But let's assume for a second that there is something that these decks all have in common. That means that on average they don't perform well. And maybe there's a select handful of decks that are actually performing and are maybe getting lost in the noise that we can bring up to the top and say, these decks are actually performing above average. What's interesting in that case is looking at, is it because those decks just have explicitly a stronger value proposition, like they get it online earlier, the payoff is greater, they're elevating the value of the other cards in the list? Is it because the pilots who play them and have built them have a very clear idea of how they want to win? Have they had experience with other archetypes and other decks? Is it just the case that certain decks only see a very small number of pilots, only a little bit of experimentation? As a result, there isn't that body of evidence. There isn't that kind of community collaborative impact of people coming together and bring the thing all together. And so
everybody's played Gretchen. Yeah, everybody's played
exactly,
Gretchen.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, loads of people have played TPI, right? So TPI, if you look at TPI on the list, it's so interesting. I had a conversation with someone the other day, not to derail the podcast, but they said they looked at it and was like, I can't see why this is considered a top 10, top 15 commander in the format. And my initial reaction is to be like, okay, no, you don't know. And then you look at it and you're like, actually, all it's doing is making a bunch of fucking 1/1s, like as you're pooping stuff out every turn. Like, what is it about this deck that warrants a level of fear at the table that I think it deservedly obtains? And so there is an aspect of kind of positive feedback loop where the things that we've sit down and choose, like this is how you build it, these are the flagship decks. Maybe if we really look at them, we'll find that we cannot identify with our own metrics for what's good and bad abnormally high performance relative to the other mid-range decks. And maybe it is the quality of the product, etc. So it is going to be interesting, I think, to look at some of these examples of decks that we all understand to be pretty good and see if we can identify themes amongst them that we think elevate them above the rest.
Well, to your point, and Adam had his hand up there for a second.
Sorry.
So for clarity, we all talked about our perspectives on mid-range and how we perceive mid-range to be a concept conceptually. So the way that it's actually being kind of reported on the website and in the data is we've established basically some windows for winning. And we make assumptions that if it wins typically in this window, then it must be mid-range. And that's realistically like how we're defining that in the data for the website, which is...
Right, so there's simplifications, right? But you hope that on average it ends up being roughly reflective of... You could pick one of those commanders and be like, wow, this deck, Gretchen is not an aggro deck, remove. Like there should be very few representations of like completely mislabeled decks.
Adam.
I was just gonna thanks. One of the points that you made about the underperformance and still, I'm going to use the word flexibility in mid range. I think it falls into one of those traps of kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. And so some of the more performative decks are going to be your combo and your control list. We talked about on our podcast aggro and seed 4 doing really well, and just these decks that dial in and kind of commit to an approach tend to be galvanized in a way that's going to make that approach happen. And what's beautiful and I think almost a curse of mid-range is that without going too deep into it, it tends to spread itself thin across approaches, and being able to kind of race to the approach that it's choosing, it might be somewhat underperformative onto what the pod wants to win. So a certain pod might want or lean to the advantage of control. A certain pod might lean to the advantage of, or, and mid-range can lean into the trend of the pod very flexibly, but it might not lean in as quickly, or it might be one card short, might be one turn short. Is what I've taken from it, and I'm oversimplifying. Ooh. We really have to have case studies.
So let me restate that to you. So the most adaptive archetype has the potential for being slow to adapt.
I don't think slow to adapt. I think slower to execute on what the pod wants it to do.
Okay, so more on the execution versus the interaction / response perspective. Okay.
Yeah, because I think that you could, if you build something super flexible, right? It might not.
Ooh.
The whole deck wasn't designed to do that one thing altogether, but maybe a quarter of the deck is.
So viewers, I don't know if you caught that, but that was Clay realizing that Adam's expression of mid-range and Clay's expression of mid-range are starting to, I mean, if they hadn't been distinct, Adam more reactive, Clay more proactive. So my confusion on Adam's discussion about like, execution, what have you, in my mind, as a more proactive player, that's a foregone conclusion. Like I am implementing my will, hopefully at will, into this pod, and that's the plan. I'm putting it down. I'm going to be the person you're going to have to deal with. Respectfully, with the less with the reactive version of mid-range. Now it's like, okay, instead of me happening to the table, now I'm watching the flow and the ebbs and seeing how I can, this is where we start getting into tempo, right? Out tempo the table to slow those game plans down enough to where I can, start putting my execution into place. So there's a lot of theory.
Maybe we're diving a bit too much into the weeds. Maybe we need to elaborate how we're going to lay out the episode before we start diving into the specifics, because I have a lot to say on this topic.
Oh, no.
Do not want to blow my load right now.
So a lot of this is foreshadowing, because the next episode is going to be theory crafting and what have you. What I'm attempting to do in this moment is kind of encapsulate our historical perspective on the performance of mid-range and illustrate to the viewer why we individually have those perspectives, and it's through those frameworks, mine being proactive, his being reactive, why we have those.
I don't feel like I think I made a comment about like maybe why new players coming in, etc., and preferences towards mid-range bars, etc., and how that might skew the data. It's actually not why I think. I think that contributes a percentage of why I think mid-range maybe is underperformed, but I can probably summarize my general opinion, which is that I think that the vast majority of what we call purely mid-range decks do not know when they want to win. And I think the lack of adherence to a strict clock and the focus on trying to stop other people or finding novel ways of acquiring advantage, etc., ultimately hurts the performance of those decks very tangibly, rather than any other external factor, or more so than any other external factor. I think that people not having a clear idea when they sit down and put a commander together, what turn they are looking to convert, and how they stop other people winning in the meantime, is the reason that these decks are not performing. Putting aside the quality of the win condition, etc., that's my central thesis. So I'm prepared to work on that to defend that for the rest of the episode.
Hear that, folks? Ben is a proactive player just like me.
I'm not saying you have to be doing shit all the time. Right? I piloted a godforsaken Simic piece of shit that wins on turn 9,000 and everyone's got to sleep by the time it wins, all right? But I think people need to know when they're supposed to be winning and be honest with themselves.
Right. Well, the main point of the last 2 minutes or so is trying to correctly identify the perspectives and bias of the people sitting in this video. Because if you get down in the comment section and you're like, Ben's an asshole, blah, 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 well, you should be specific.
Just take by the womb. That is a correct conclusion.
You should be specific. And I would suggest that in that specificity, acknowledge whether or not you too are a proactive player or you are a reactive player, and then assess whether or not your disagreement comes from maybe that difference in perspective. So another reason why it was probably invaluable to kind of illustrate those perspectives is because now it's time to talk about commanders.
Let's go. Let's talk about commanders.
So what we did is previous to hitting the record button, we looked through the power rankings dashboard, which has been recently updated to have some additional metrics there for your viewing and assessing pleasure. And we kind of tried to pull out some adequately performing mid-range lists or commanders to discuss those. And the three that we settled on kind of like as our benchmark, we're going to talk about other commanders as well. But the three that we're going to talk about specifically are Wilson Far Traveler, TPI, and Vizkopa. Now, Vizkopa is an interesting choice, but we'll save all that for later. Let's start with Wilson. Does anybody have anything?
Let's talk.
Yeah, of course, I'll put the links to the specific deck lists that we're talking about in the description below, so that way you have a reference for what we're looking at. So I think I can kick this off.
Just start by naming what the win rate is. So what Wilson win rate was up
that is
like 25. What was it?
That is absolutely a correct thing to look for. I am clicking.
So I think another caveat to be pointed is because of how many commanders there are, and because of the schedule of existing events, etc. When people often come to the website, one thing they often observe is that there aren't that many sample points per deck. Now, Wilson actually has 14 wins and something like a 31% win rate, which means that it's seen actually quite a lot of representation. There will be decks in here that you feel. Oh, sorry, Clay, go on.
It's 34%. Yep.
Oh, okay. I must be looking at the wrong bit. But
and three top fours.
Yeah, but there will be decks in here that you might look at and think this actually looks pretty decent, or it's done abnormally well. You think actually the sample of games is too small, and you're correct. So what we've tried to do is pick on decks that not only have performed well and we think deserve to perform well, but also have like an acceptable or an above average representation.
Exactly. So just to recap, Wilson Far Traveler has 16 total wins, a 34% overall win rate, an above average performance or Z score, and a relatively strong strength of schedule. So strength of schedule is its performance compared to the performance of other commanders. The better other commanders perform, the better that your strength of schedule score will be. And then lost it, and then once again 3 top fours. So that's the current as of recording stats for Wilson Far Traveler. The basic premise of Hive's list, which is the one that we're looking at, the person most.
Shout out to Hive. I was about to say, so people get very touchy when you start attributing who built what list.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm certain that somebody at some point has piloted this deck years ago or whenever the commander was initially released. As far as I'm concerned, the first person I saw not only put this list together, but pilot it to significant success was Hive Cryptid. We see it incidentally online, but certainly historically has played a lot in events, done phenomenally well, phenomenal pilot. So big shout out to Hive for bringing Selesnya to the big stage where previously we did not have a lot of representation, maybe Seiju Enchanter and basically nothing else. Mystic Enforcer we'll talk about in a bit, but sorry, Clay, go on.
Yeah.
Well, but before Clay takes that, I just want to echo that. Hive is a fantastic pilot, fantastic human being. I miss Hive. They've not been around as often, but I'll tell you what, fantastic, beautiful think tank on building this deck, committing to this deck, and making it into the absolute powerhouse that it is now. So I just want to say hats off, Hive. I hope that you're.
Yeah, and yeah, I can't wait to play with them.
To CPDH Dicks Out for Hive Cryptid podcast.
I mean, if we were going to stand for somebody, I mean, might as well. So the basic premise and like the super basic premise behind this Wilson Far Traveler deck is that what the commander is trying to do. So the commander is really difficult to interact with because of the Ward 2. It also
counterability
and the uncounterability. So sticking the commander and then sticking Far Traveler, which is a background for 2 and a white that says commander creatures you own have at the beginning of your insta untap or exile up to 1 target tap creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So the idea is to get your background and your commander out and then attack with certain value creatures that have relevant ETBs. So that way you're generating value throughout the game by bringing in a Thraben Inspector or a spirited companion or one of the Heliod's Pilgrim, something like that helps you generate your breaking parity by flickering these creatures every turn and drawing an additional card or tutoring an additional card or what have you. That's how you're breaking parity. You also have a limited number of tutors in the deck that search for very specific interaction pieces, usually aura based. And I think that's a good synopsis of how the deck plays and attempts to win.
So if I could just talk about the play pattern specifically, what the deck normally looks to do is resolve Wilson onto, because Wilson there's generally not a lot of reason not to, even put aside the fact that it can't be countered later on, whatever. Just being able to poke somebody with a 2/2 bear with trample that they're probably not going to burn interaction on is generally a good premise, and it gets bigger very quickly. As soon as possible, you look to resolve a cantrip creature, something which you can then use every turn to draw an extra card. But once you get to a certain point in the game, and again, I don't pilot the deck, I'm not talking specifics, so I'm going to guess around the sort of turn 7-8 mark onwards, you're looking for some very high quality flicker effect. You're looking for something like the Heliod's Pilgrim to go and rip the Sigil of Nair out of your list, all the Glitters, the Ancestral Mask, etc. You're looking for the Stonehorn Dignitary to just omit, the other combat deck from the meta. You're looking for the creature that maybe gains you a bunch of life, or it puts a 1/1 counter on all your creatures, so you have some kind of other scaling threat. You're looking to convert from being extremely irritating, which is the kind of deck's modus operandi that is just very painful to interact with productively, to downright terrifying in the later stages of the game.
I want to just echo one thing that I a couple of years ago, I can't believe it's been this long. Spent a lot of time talking with Hive, trying to learn how to build and just kind of learn from their expertise. And one thing that I remember Hive saying is that the real commander is actually Far Traveler, and Wilson just happens to be, like you said, part of the end, one of the solutions that you can have to close the game out. But the real engine is going to be the Far Traveler and abusing those effects that you talked about. So that's kind of the showcase of the deck.
Do we want to do a quick roundtable on what we think the strengths of the decks and the weaknesses of the deck are? Or
and I wanna actually bring that word engine up, because I think it'll be pertinent to this larger. I know. So
we have I've come to accept that we have to use it because I can't think of anything better, but I'm still going to make groaning faces whenever anyone talks about it.
So engine is the shorthand. I think I've heard both Ben and Adam refer to, maybe not to engine specifically, as value propositions, but I'm going to use that terminology. So value proposition as embodied in a card, as Adam just said, the real commander for Far Traveler, Wilson, is Far Traveler. So I think the reason why this deck has the success that it has, and I'm kind of leaning a little bit both in the future and in the past, is there's been a temptation to include as many valuable, value pieces in mid-range lists as you possibly can. And this list here is what I feel an expression of the limited inclusion of value pieces, to gain value propositions, off of, and exploiting the strengths of those value pieces as you naturally play the game. So that's how I particularly feel.
So we're elevating the value beyond the initial value of the card.
Yes.
So like you wouldn't play a commander that didn't allow you to extract some value from each card you play beyond its face value, or you're literally describing a vanilla creature, right? But it's some way of consistently being able to convert everything you play into some higher ceiling, some additional level of performance. It is kind of a fluffy word because some people mean it to mean some kind of recursive mechanism that when you put some fuel into it, it kicks off and does its own thing. But my view is that, Gutter Snipe is in its own way as an engine. It converts every spell you cast into an extra damage on each player. Mystic Enforcer is an engine because
which explains the sigh.
No, well, it is. We don't have a better term to do it. It's one of those things where, do you know when people say about porn, where they're like, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. That's how I feel about engines. Is you don't really know what an engine is, and then you see it like, yeah, okay, that's an engine.
I know how to define it.
Yeah, Clay, let's talk. What we really wanted to talk about. Sorry, I interrupted your flow of thought there, Clay. But yeah,
that was basically the crux. Is its expression in the meta, e.g., performance, I feel has been born on the back of exactly what we were just talking about. Not an over representation or leaning too heavily on every piece being a value piece, which historically has been a mid-range issue with deck construction, is like everything has to generate value like independently. Well, okay, now you don't have a cohesive game plan, you know.
Yeah, 100%. So if I
go ahead.
Oh, Adam, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But one of the things that there's something for all the viewers and all of us here. I think that one thing that mid-range runs into, there were some ideas that the prof actually brought up on some of his old videos, Tolarian Tutor, where he talks about control, and then he also has an aggro, how to play them in Commander. I encourage everybody to watch those videos and put those two videos concepts together in mid-range, because when you're in a potted circumstance and you're trying to play, like when I think classic mid-range, I think Jund from a while ago, you know, from way back. That was like the iconic
modern Jund. Yeah.
Modern Jund, thank you, from way back. Or if you want to go super way back, you can go to Dead Guy Ale, right? But that was the iconic, but you had one opponent. And so your card for card trading, you would break parity over time by getting more than what you took from your opponent over time through Dark Confidant.
Attrition, right? Yeah, your attrition was better quality than.
Well, but when you've got 3 opponents, you can't race it that way. You're actually going to end up bleeding to do that. So you have to be very specific with spot removal and find the meaningful pieces and moments of interaction throughout a game. Very challenging to pilot, and very challenging with limited information on what's in 3 different hands, you know, and so forth. So anyway, but that's, I think, also part of why having an engine like Far Traveler is so important, because now you're not spending cards to get effects. It's just being repeated. So you get more value from those effects, less cards and less mana spent to get those effects and that impact. So it actually multiplies the impact of, you know, the cards. So.
In an attempt to speed run, not necessarily, because once we talked a lot in depth about Far Traveler, Wilson. It's funny that now that I'm professing it that way, that the points relative to TPI and Vizkopa will probably be similar, although Vizkopa will give us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about archetypes in general. But just really quick, for Wilson Far Traveler. So for those of you who are patrons, already have access to this tool. I built a Commander matchup analysis tool that allows you to put in any commander and discover its good and bad matchups historically in the data, not predicting the future, but historically speaking. And Wilson Far Traveler's best matchups are Abdel Black, ironically Sir Conrad, Gretchen Titchwillow, Malcolm Roger, and Sphinx Summoner. And then on the flip side of that, prepare yourself, its worst matchups are Gretchen Titchwillow, Sir Conrad, Abdel Black, TPI, and Lorehold Apprentice. So,
right. So really what I was just telling you is that it's making its way into a lot of higher level pods, which means that it's kind of a flip whether it wins or doesn't win. But the fact that it's in those pods in the first place tells you a lot about the deck. So
yes. So this is Wilson Far Traveler is an interesting case study on the performance of mid-range. And I mean, you could, I don't want to say middling performance, but like, you know, it's definitely stuck in this, this something. So we can,
if I could talk briefly on that then. So I'll try and give a 2-minute synopsis on how I feel about the deck. So I think what the deck does basically is be really irritating. If you look at what play pattern, it resolves enough bodies that it's able to chump block a lot of outright Voltron decks. It creates enough damage that it's able to significantly threaten pure combo players, and then because of the vigilance, it then is able to defend itself against the more aggressive decks, especially with reach as well, blocking flyers. There are some massive gotchas where you're able to find something like the Ancestral Mask, the All the Glitters, something like the Sigil of Naya, that transforms the power of the creature, you know, 3 or 4 up to like 9 or 10 or something absolutely disgusting, absurd. So there's some additional hidden information, there's some ability to suddenly turn the corner. It's not a linear, predictable deck. There is some question about card quality in the deck. I mean, again, you're running a lot of these little like hand-trippy guys, etc., and you're only blinking one of them a turn. But because they all, or for the most part, they replace themselves, you don't feel the impact of those cards individually as much because you kind of just play them. They're there as a blocker, they're there as a backup thing to flick it if you want to, and you're then moving on to the next card in your list. In terms of the problems that Selesnya has specifically, the big ones are card advantage. Again, the whole deck is built to try and help solve that problem, but also quality of interaction. Selesnya normally has to rely on damage equal to number of creature spells, protection enablers, and then fight or bite spells in order to try and prevent other people from winning the game. The deck is well equipped to take advantage of those tools. So excluding specific tools like Last Breath and Prismatic Strands, if you look at, for example, you have cards like Ram Through, which functions with Wilson as a way to outright actually punch someone and end the game directly. You've got cards like you can run things like Crib Swap and Generous Gift if you want access to them. You can run things like the Coordinated Maneuver, etc., because you do have a wide board. It's able to squeeze as much juice as possible out of the best tools that those colors have available. So to touch on your point there, Clay, about feeling that maybe the deck is stuck a little bit, it can't quite break into that top level conversation. I'm not sure how to feel about that one way or the other, but what I would say is that I think at some point with every deck, you start to bump your head on the ceiling of the list. And one of the problems with Wilson Traveller is that whilst it's neat and it's able to extract additional value from these individual pieces, there's not really a compounding effect where you start flickering 2 creatures and 4 creatures and 6 creatures in the way that, for example, an Abdel does. You get to a point in the mid-range where you're just kind of flickering the one thing, drawing an extra card, and the one thing and the extra card. And after a while, I do think that, and in certain matchups, you start to feel the limitations on performance of the deck. But having said all of that, I think that putting aside the fact that it's kind of a participation trophy, wow, one of the best Selesnya decks, I do think that this deck is very good and has options to play into a lot of the best decks in the format. It's just about fast enough to threaten Gretchen and Weavers. It's just about defensive enough to be able to stuff out the Dargo, etc. It's just about good enough interacting with people to have the light, the bolt from the heavens that stops the Abdel from popping off or whatever. It's got just about enough stuff. There is some, again, questions with card quality. Has to run things like Flywheel Racer and Springleaf on these cards that they're not horrible, but you maybe wouldn't want to run them if you didn't have to tap things down for Traveller. There is some questions about the limitations of Selesnya, but ultimately I think this deck is likely to be performant almost irrespective of the meta. And I think that is a really big accolade in its favor.
Adam, close us out. Close us out on Wilson Far Traveler.
I agree with a lot of what you just said. But I think conceptually we're aligned. There are a few pieces that I disagree with. And one of the things that I would say is that Wilson Far Traveler, I believe, is the most performative mid-range deck that we have right now in the online meta. And I think that part of why it's so performative is when Hive created this, and I know that other people have made it too, but I'm going to give it to Hive, at least in my circle, that Hive made a Dark Confidant. We don't have one. Let's make one with Far Traveler and with the ETB.
Or they made one.
Well, with the ETB draw cards and draw card Gain of Life. In the late stages of the game, this incremental growth, right, which is steady over time, is its gift and its curse. And I think that the weakness of the deck is equally its strength, the Far Traveler, the engine. And so I agree with Ben's point of view, like for example, with Gretchen, I think Weavers would even be a better example of the go quick turbo combo list. If you get to the late game with Wilson Far Traveler, good luck, right? It's really tricky. So it does what we want to see mid-range doing. I think it's a great example that you selected here, Clay.
Sweet. Okay. Turn the page over into TPI. So the stats on TPI, Third Path Iconoclast. It has 25 wins, a win rate of 30.1%, a positive Z-score value, and has 7 top 4s. Now, points of note is that TPI as a commander listed in the data is listed or is an aggregate of all the various TPIs. So it has my Knack combo TPI. It has Ross Berkowitz's Ashnod's Altar combo version of TPI, and then it has Ryan's straight mid-range version of TPI. Now, it's important to point that out, but as we will get into the deck, this is where Ben is going to introduce some interesting concepts. Before we do that, so TPI's most favorable matchups are Gretchen Titchwillow, Elias Ilkor, Rilsa Rail, Abdel Blue, Abdel Black. Its most unfavorable matchups are Gretchen Titchwillow, Abdel Blue, Abdel Black, Tatiova, and then Gut Leader. Is its
my old nemesis / punching bag / tormentor, Gretchen Titchwillow.
So similarly to Wilson Far Traveler, I'm sure we could all agree, Third Path Iconoclast TPI acts has a value proposition that rewards you for playing Magic like you would normally do, providing you in this case with extra 1/1 artifact soldiers, colorless soldiers. Tokens, and those tokens can be converted into, either discounts or sacrifice fodder or, Ashnod's altar ritual lines, like any number of things. So that is the value I posit is the value proposition for TPI, is the ability to convert normal game actions. So, okay, I turn the floor. Adams, you want to go first this time?
Yeah. Can we take a break though?
Nope.
Okay. So the all right.
You can.
So the way that I
weird little dominatrix component of the conversation, then.
Right.
You can't take a break, you dirty bitch.
We've got about 10 minutes before we wrap this up. So if you can hold it for that long.
I can do that. So TPI is a very versatile commander going wide.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think ever goes out of style.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to have versatility in the command zone and synergy with casting non-creature spells, I mean, that's usually half of the deck's cards. So anywhere from a third to half the deck's cards. So I can see how the versatility of TPI makes it a beautiful mid-range list. I can also see it being a combo list, control list. You can go wide with aggro. So when I see TPI at the table, I just know out the wide spread and see whether or not they're going to attack me or if they're going to be slinging spells, whatever. So versatility is my answer. That's why it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll jump in quick. So TPI does a few things that I think are really important for mid-range decks, and it does them exceptionally well. The first thing is that it's able to take advantage of some of the best cards we have access to in the meta. It's a card draw, you've got Shared Discovery, Secrets of the Golden City, you've got Of One Mind, you've got Treasure Cruise, you've got your Lorien Revealed, you've got your Keep Watch, Distant Melody. There are so many cards that it just takes and moves to the next level on account of just what the commander does. The second point worth making is that it's not only the perfect colors, but that is it kind of cantrippy, spell slingy as a deck premise is like very well established at this point. It's honestly quite difficult to make an is it spell slinger deck that isn't at least somewhat performant or will at least catch someone off guard on occasion. We have access to all of the pingers, which have made a name for themselves in the meta in the last couple of years, your Firebrand Archers, your Kessig Flame Breathers, etc. On account of what the commander does, it then also gets access to the Witty Roastmaster, it gets access to the Impact Tremors, and then with the new Final Fantasy set, you get a small selection of cards that care about casting non-creature spells more broadly. If you're looking for passive damage, you can layer down. This deck is absolutely phenomenal at that. You're able to extract value even when the commander is then removed. So it's not the case as if with, for example, a Voltron list where you pump the commander up. If the commander is removed, your likelihood of winning the game just nosedives. TPI is not expensive to recast, but even forgetting about Ashnod's, etc. And it doesn't need to have haste in order to do the thing. You can play it very early and begin extracting value. You have a variety of disgusting artifact synergies, things like Reverse Engineer, things like Galvanic Blast, which allow you to just perform a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently than a lot of its mid-range contemporaries. And again, because you are doing almost nothing but digging about and controlling the board, you are well suited to finding and resolving combo. I mean, it's a soft outlet for Flicker combo. If you have a pinger in play, it's then a hard outlet for Flicker combo as well. Likewise, you can do stuff with Ashnod's. If you could probably find some other source of dumping your infinite mana if you want to do something like Clever Conjurer, etc. it's just a very, very versatile, very adaptable list, to echo something Adam has said. You can adjust this to whatever the meta roughly looks like. And probably the one big weakness is that it's not blisteringly quick, and it is a little bit vulnerable to what comes off the top. It is technically possible, as with all these decks that don't have access to resource advantage in the command zone, that you could hit like 5 lands in a row or 4 lands in a mana rock in a row or whatever, and suddenly you're stuck. You can't advance your board state. Bunch of 1/1 soldiers, not too threatening by themselves. You do have access to a few spells like Pack Attack in order to convert them higher, but it is possible, again, you can get wrapped up by board wipes. You can just not have the reach to close the game before another player takes action. So I think lack of a really credible, really definitive win condition that is not like a really tight 2-card combo in the way that, like, Gretchen has, does hurt the deck a little bit. But if we're talking about decks where you could give this to anybody and they would end up doing something impactful at the table, this is one of the best decks in the format. The card quality is exceptionally high. The ability to take some of those best tools and elevate the ceiling of those decks is exceptionally high. Very, very, very scary commander.
So I can wrap up TPI by introducing. So prior to the episode, we talked about discussing like certain traps with regard to mid-range. We can probably point those out in passing as we get towards the end. But TPI, now this is my own personal perspective. There's a lot of high mana value convoke spells that do like really cool instant speed things. There's been a lot of
etc.
Yeah, there's been a lot of emphasis on playing those kind of cards, specifically in the mid-range focused builds. The problem with those is if you get board wiped, or if you don't have TPI from a very early stage, you're not generating the convoke value to pay for those spells. So now you have dead cards in hand. So you got to be aware of those traps. But also, this is a good point. Getting into Vizkopa, of kind of discussing the malleability of mid-range. As you can see, we brought up TPI, but we also talked about the combo variants of TPI, which are listed as combo lists in the data. But I don't know, both Ben and Adam had some thoughts relative to that. Do you want to clean up on that concept before we head to Vizkopa and actually really talk about that concept?
The concept of labeling something as combo versus midrange.
Right, and how a deck expresses yourself. Like, specifically, I mentioned Vizkopa. Well, Ben mentioned Vizkopa as a mid-range list, and I was like, that's a combo list. And then he's like, his perspective on combo was one thing, and my perspective on combo was another thing, which could give the opportunity for determinate combo to be listed as a mid-range list versus being a straight combo list. So that's kind of the whole premise I was introducing.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Adam?
Yeah, I was going to say that kind of goes back to the beginning of the video when I defined mid-range, and saying that even before I defined mid-range, I said that these archetypes tend to be considered labels that are concrete within themselves and how they play. And I know that I'm kind of the abstract one out of it, but the point is that they have so much flexibility that we have a hard time, even with right now, like it's TPI, a combo list, a control list, a mid-range list. It is how you build the strategy, but it's also how versatile the tactics are in the pod. And so I think that if you build it to be turbo, combo, super proactive line, I think the more proactive you are, you tend to almost zone in on strategy more and commit to that strategy more than being a little bit more reactive. You tend to be able to pivot a little bit more, although all can pivot. So that's the delineation, is how is it built and how is it piloted. So that's my take. Go ahead.
Apologies, sorry. I would agree with that point. Look, I mean, we had a big discussion, Adam and I, in the episode about aggro, about what the purpose of labels was in the first place. And there is a good argument that it's kind of meaningless. I think it's fun to talk about these things. It gives us, it's a thesis on what decks that perform in a certain way might have in common, or a lens to look at that format through. But there's just, you can bucket this up as much as you want, and actually it might kind of turn out that this is not a valid way of looking at anything. it might turn out that when we be talking yapping away about how good combo is, if you look at the data, maybe there's like 2 combo commanders that perform and the rest is absolute dog shit. Right? So there's never an end to the reward you get from more numerical analysis, quantitative analysis, etc. On that specific point about mid-range versus combo in terms of context of Vizkopa, I think that when people come and ask, can I play combo in this format, they have something very specific in mind. They're looking to do something very splashy and end the game in a very small number of turns. Now, Vizkopa does end the game typically in a small number of turns, but I feel like it's not really. I understand what you mean about being a non-determinate form of combo in the sense that you're looking to set up a very high value proposition and be very explosive. But I feel like the flavor of what combo shells are typically looking to do, which is dig about incessantly for a few select number of pieces and then find an opportunity to resolve them, is not really in line with what Vizkopa is looking to do, which is vomit out a bunch of mana rocks, wait for a suitable opportunity, and then play some spells with the expectation that more life gain spells are coming up off the top indefinitely. It's not that I don't think there's overlap, because there certainly is. It's that I think that maybe the stresses and the risks and the challenges associated with the colors are slightly different between what Vizkopa is looking to do versus like a Gretchen, etc.
Then that's a perfect segue. So for Vizkopa Guildmage, once again, all these lists will be linked down in the description. The one I'll be providing you is actually an older list from Scarecrow from the first RIW. His list is built on the back of activated abilities, or it'd be activated abilities, so he could sacrifice, layer the stack, and make a basically uninteractable type of win condition. So that'll be the list that I'm giving you. It's about 2 years old now, so forgive me on that. But by and large, Vizkopa is a life gain, life drain type list. So Vizkopa has 16 wins, 42.1% win rate, has 3 top 4s. Its good matchups are Malcolm Kedis, Jiri, Master of the Review, Young Pyromancer, Gretchen Titchwillow, Gut Leader. Gut Inspired.
Showing its age there a bit. Young Pyromancer. Shout out to Young Pyromancer. What from Grace. Holy shit. That's hilarious.
So Vizkopa's bad matchups are TPI, Metastatic Evangel, which is a creature that is being expressed in the year-long league in Iowa. The Agent Black, Abdel Black, Furnace Hellkite, and Woodsage. Furnace Hellkite and Woodsage also part of that league that's happening down in Iowa. So, looking at Vizkopa, generally speaking, it's Land of Vizkopa, count to about 11, play a big splashy spell like, what's a good one here? Warport, Congregate, Meditation Puzzle, something like
Congregate
that.
Is the big daddy. You land a Congregate, you're not winning the game, something's gone terribly wrong. You're probably playing against another Vizkopa.
Yeah. So it's Congregate, Vizkopa, and a couple of Vizkopa activations, and you go up 24 life and they go down 24 life.
48.
Or whatever. Maybe. Yeah. Double activation. Yeah. And that's usually, so when I talk about like a deterministic combo, it's a very finite number of things that your actions that you're taking, and a very finite result from those actions between a couple of cards and X number of mana.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
Adam, do you want to jump in on this? What do you think? Strengths, weaknesses?
I think that it has a lot of strengths in the fact that life gain is built into the win condition. So by default, I was surprised there weren't a lot of Voltron list weakness. Actually, I was very surprised at that. But there
aren't many of them in the meta generally. So
yeah, there's not a lot, and we can talk about this another time, but Voltron is, in my mind, a means to an end, not an archetype. But the main thing, though, is that with Vizkopa, it also can tap into a really sick combo between Children of Corliss and Soul Channeling. You can just pay the life down, get it all back, and then this like doomsday elevator that comes out of just a few mana and a few cards. But it's so cool for the fact that it uses its own survivability and weaponizes it against its opponents. It's the only command zone centric version that I'm aware of that's had success in the format, and it's got some of the best recursive colors. So you're getting value out of the effects because you get them all in black and white. And my challenge with black and white, though, if I'm looking at weaknesses just from the color scheme, is that white, you got to get really, really creative to get a lot of velocity out of white. And black, you can get a lot of velocity, but it's very expensive. You often get a net card. Like, I mean, if you're doing village rights, it actually takes 2 cards, unless you have a token, 2 cards to get 2 cards. Bone shards, it takes 2 cards to get rid of 1 card. And so you really have to play card advantage smartly. And I think almost all of the aristocrat style decks do best just because you're using tokens instead of cards for those sacks for the sacrifice. So it's you got to build it right, and you see trends in how it's built. When you see trends in how it's built, you can see how to beat it. And I think that's kind of the weakness of Vizkopa.
So
okay. So sorry, can I go on?
Oh no. I was going to say as you round out your Vizkopa talk, you should probably finish with a light breeze of or discussion of some of the traps to kind of finish us off, and then we can end the episode.
Sure.
And Knucklehead can go pee. Or no, he's that way on the screen.
I would also like to go and pee. Okay, let me give my perspective of Vizkopa. Okay, first of all, I think the first thing to say about Vizkopa, in the same vein as what's Traveler, is it is really cool. Right, this is a very cool little list. It's cool aesthetically as a commander. It's cool that we have the option to play it. And I think that gives the deck a bit more of a buffer against criticism than maybe it should experience. Okay. In my view, Vizkopa is on the brink of being what I would call a parasitic deck. What I mean a parasitic deck is a deck which cannot solve enough problems at the table to justify to win in a vacuum by itself, and thus therefore relies on other people being somewhat responsible. But if it's left alone long enough, can inevitably take over the game. In order to be left alone long enough, it has to present as not threatening enough in order to get that breathing room to set up its pieces and not be digging about desperately for ways to die. I think Adam's point about card velocity is actually quite important. Not because I'm dicks out for card draw, we got to get as much drawing cards as possible, but because it is worth noting that what black typically does, white doesn't really do anything to draw cards outside of a very selectively small number of mechanics like the Monarch, etc. And what black typically does is either run these kind of really clunky 3 mana draw 2, lose 2s, or like these kind of plunder effects that are 1 or 2 mana instant speed, but you have to sack something. And Vizkopa doesn't really desperately want to be doing either of those 2 things. It has no problem sucking up the life loss of the 3 mana spells or something, but they're not great spells to build a list around. And so what decks tend to do is forgo it altogether, sit and patiently farm cards and wait to resolve 1 or 2 big bombs. Problem with this is that you are a mid-range deck in a format where mid-range decks need to see a lot of interaction or they will get crushed, or be able to apply pressure to other people. Vizkopa neither sees a lot of interaction nor applies a lot of pressure to other people in the early stages of the game. What Vizkopa is phenomenal at is keeping a low profile and then obliterating other mid-range decks. And I think one thing that people consistently forget with this deck is just how the disparity between some of the quality of these life gain spells. There is a night and day quality between Potion of Healing or Healing Potion, whatever it's called, and the 4 mana Congregate, right? It's a disparity, even with 1 activation on the stack, of like taking 3 to 6 damage versus taking like 20 damage or something absurd. And I think it gets a lot of breathing room because people think, I'm going to roll the dice on this one, I'm going to risk another turn, and now you're out of luck. And one of the big strengths of this deck is that it's just not difficult to recast the commander, and it doesn't have the summoning sickness is irrelevant. You can resolve this commander at 4 or 6 mana with 11 mana open, pay the ability once and crack the healing, the food token or something, whatever it is, and then finish the job at the table. It is a pure mana sink. It's a very good mana sink, but that is all it is. And it comes with all the problems that decks that are just mana sinks have. And so I think Vizkopa is one of those decks that is exceptional in certain metas. Mid-range, life gain, not commander damage, life gain heavy metas, it's phenomenal. But it needs a lot of help to deal with the decks at the table that it can't deal with. And it therefore relies on those people misunderstanding or rolling the dice and losing the bet on their ability to kill it before it kills them in whatever deal they strike. So it's a deck I have a hard time recommending to new people, other than the fact it's really cool, because I can't guarantee consistent results and I can't guarantee a positive reception at the table.
Mm-hmm. Social skill intensive.
Something that Magic players famously very good at, so don't worry, boys.
I think that you need it anyway. Whatever you pilot, you got to be able to talk, and you got to be able to.
You got to be able to talk, and I think it is a deck that you either shut the fuck up and do nothing, and say nothing, game, or you politic your butt off. There is no in between.
And politicking is another episode. Good. Yes, good.
Yeah, more yapping. We need people yapping.
So wrap us up with the some traps that you perceive, and then from there we'll send it to the editor.
Sounds good. Okay, so I assume we'd have an equal amount of time to talk about stuff, but I wanted to quickly touch on a couple of decks that the data suggests aren't performing as well, and I think are well known enough to be worth talking about. The first one is Sivir's Cloakwood. Sivir's Cloakwood, again, is really cool. The fact that people love Golgari, I love Golgari. I think the fact that the commander replaces the things that you're sacking is really neat. I think you get access to a lot of good bleed tools. You get access to a lot of good payoffs. The core problem, in my view, with Sivir's Cloakwood is that it's not only slow as Ditchwater, but that it is your performance is to some extent in the hands of your opponents. You sack whatever it is, you tap it, and then your opponents get to choose whether you get whatever you want or you don't. And so while there's a tendency to imagine that you're farming a lot of cards, the quality of those cards is extremely suspect. There's also a problem with the fact that a lot of what the deck is trying to do is like direct damage to everybody, which makes it very difficult to politic in terms of being able to direct your damage in one direction. But principally, I think this is a very slow deck that doesn't see as many cards as a lot of people think that it will. And there is also a question about the quality of those cards at large. The second deck I wanted to quickly talk on, and I'll give Adam and Claire the chance to jump in, and I'll rattle through these, is Rasad in Bashir plus basically any background. The core problem with Rasad is that he's not really fast enough to be a strict aggro deck, and that the deck does as close to nothing as it's possible for a deck to do without Rasad in play. And you get these horrendous situations where you go to kill someone, you're swinging with all of your pumped up creatures that are attacking with damage equal to their toughness rather than their combat, rather than their power, which means they're very cheap, they're very efficient. Someone removes Rasad and you've dealt literally 0 damage to that player and left yourself completely open on the back end. It doesn't really have fantastic synergies with most cards in the list. It's entirely commander-centric. There are just better things to be playing if you care about playing some kind of white aggro deck. The third thing for commander, which is a little bit sad one, because I actually think this commander is really cool, would be Karda Doomscourge, which is somewhat underperforming the meta. Look, Karda is a creature that when it comes down, it basically goads everything, and then you get rewarded by pinging people when stuff dies, period. The big problem with Karda is that it makes a lot of sense in a mid-range meta and almost no sense in what we understand to be the best CPDH decks in the meta. Being able to force like the Abdel tokens to attack is a big upside, but if you look at the scope of decks in the meta, things like Gart and Dargo and those other kind of stuff, like by the time Karda comes down and starts actually making you do the thing, it's often in many cases you might either be the last person left alive in the first place, or that damage was going to be symmetrical through one mechanism or other anyways. And there are going to be pods where you come down and you're playing against Izzet Guildmage, Gretchen, and then I'm trying to think of another example, like Scholar of the Ages, and Karda is worth effectively nothing. It's not that the cards suck, it's not that the card quality is bad, it's that there's a significant opportunity cost associated with putting a Rakdos commander in that shell. There's a lot of other Rakdos commanders like Stormcaller Erasure, like Dargo Kesket, like Mayhem Devil that you could be experimenting with, could be running. And in my view, Karda just doesn't do enough to justify itself over each of those commanders, particularly because most of the value is tied up with the ETB. And it's not trivial to keep using that ETB in a way that actually consistently extracts you value.
I can say what you just said differently. Kardur was strong when the meta, the average turn in the meta was 12. The average turn in the meta is 9 now. So to further exemplify Ben's point about not being fast enough, never mind the arcwoodness of like when you come down. I mean, just 3 turns is a lot in a competitive meta. So it's just one of those things. I'm not saying, and I don't think Ben is saying either, that you won't be able to play Kardur and squeak out a win. That's not what we're saying. It's just that you need to kind of maybe temper your expectations, given that the faster decks are faster than they used to be when Kardur was, a mainstay. So, Adam, go ahead.
100%.
I think to encapsulate without going into a ton of specific examples, because Ben did a beautiful job with that. I agree with the majority of what you said there, Ben. To put a wrap around it, I would say that mid-range probably best defines its success rate on its ability to have repeated effects to gain advantage. So, Far Traveler, I think, is the best. Is going to be the best mid-range commander and Abdel, those two, because of their ability to have layered ETB effects coming in and maximizing them over the time and being able to we mentioned Snipe, we mentioned some others. So being able to have like TPI, where you can play one card and compound and get multiple effects from the other cards you. So I think that would be the way to, if I'm building a brand new mid-range deck and I'm trying to have the next new thing, try to have something that's going to have repeatable effects that you can outpace your opponents with.
Sweet.
Happy to wrap us up, Clay?
Yep. So, as you can tell, we have lots more material that we could discuss with this. However, we're currently sitting at an hour 20 on the episode, and we want to free you guys to go use the potty. I got a potty too, so I've got the old man bladder. So, as a general summation, this episode was almost exclusively focused on the historical performance and perspective of mid-range in the competitive meta. Kind of not necessarily meant to be bookended by the video that Ben and I did regarding our commentary on contemporary or contemporary mid-range match, but meant to be more of a complete, eventually, lexicon regarding our perspectives on mid-range as an archetype, as a game plan, as a deck building premise, whatever. That's what these episodes are kind of looking to explore and perhaps even demonstrate. So yeah, keep a lookout for the next episode. The next one will be from the vibes perspective. And thanks all for watching. Make sure you give them shit in the comments. Complete shit.
Yeah, more shit. Give us shit. Can't get enough of it.
All right, fam. Peace.
Catch you boys later.
Everybody.